Ever get stuck with one of those English textbooks? The kind that sounds like it was written by someone who's maybe never even spoken to an actual English speaker.
I know exactly what you mean.
Like those dialogues about, I don't know, popping over to the off license or having a chin wag.
Right. Those expressions that nobody actually uses.
It's like, am I learning English or am I like suddenly in a Dickens novel?
Yeah.
And then don't even get me started on those grammar rules.
Oh, tell me about it.
It's enough to make your head spin.
Yeah.
So to help us unpack some of this, we're diving into English language teaching now and how it could be by Geoff Jordan.
Great book.
Have you had a chance to look at it?
Yeah, I've read it.
So Jordan, he's a veteran teacher, big-time researcher in the field, and he's got some pretty strong opinions about how we can ditch those like really outdated methods and make language learning actually effective and, dare I say, even enjoyable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're going to unpack all of that, but first, can you give us like the main takeaway?
Well, it's really interesting, right? He digs into like the science of how our brains learn languages.
Okay.
And a lot of times the way we're taught, especially as beginners, is kind of like, trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this square peg round hole situation.
Well, we humans, we're hardwired for language.
Yeah.
That's in our DNA.
Right.
But it's not like memorizing a list of vocabulary or a bunch of rules.
Right.
It's a creative process, and there are stages. You can't skip ahead.
So you're saying no matter how hard we try to cram, we can't just like skip to the head of the line.
Exactly. And Jordan talks about these things called developmental sequences.
Okay.
And that's just part of natural language learning.
Yeah.
And teachers, we can't force our students to just kind of jump over these stages.
Right. So we've established that cramming doesn't work. So what does?
Well, one of the things that Jordan really emphasizes is this idea of implicit knowledge.
Okay.
And implicit knowledge is this kind of subconscious understanding of how the language works.
Okay, so implicit knowledge. Got it.
Yeah.
How's that different from the grammar and vocabulary that we, consciously learn?
Well, think of it this way. Okay. You know how to ride a bike, right?
Yeah.
But can you explain to me, like, the physics behind how you're able to balance and move and all that?
Not a chance.
But you can still ride the bike.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because your brain has developed this implicit understanding of how it works.
So you're saying that with language, it's not just about knowing the rules, but we need to develop, like, the feel.
The intuition.
The intuition.
Exactly. It's the key to fluency.
Okay.
And that's actually where those traditional classrooms, they fall a little bit short.
Okay.
Because they tend to focus so much on, the textbook stuff, that explicit knowledge.
Right.
When really what we should be doing is finding ways to give our students meaningful exposure to the language.
So I'm sensing that Jordan probably has some thoughts about how we actually do that.
He does.
Okay. So how do we actually, ditch the textbook and get that real-world exposure?
Well, that's where Jordan introduces these ideas of incidental learning and input richness.
Okay.
It's about creating an environment where students are just surrounded by the language, but not just, passively listening, right? It has to be meaningful.
So it can't just be like, more English, more English, more English. It has to be the right kind of English.
Exactly. It's not about quantity, it's about quality.
Okay.
And it has to be authentic, right?
Well, authentic, okay.
So instead of those like sterilized textbook dialogues,
right,
he wants us to expose our students to the real deal. Movies, podcasts, even eavesdropping on conversation.
Okay, with permission, of course.
Of course. But you get the idea, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of like how we learned our first language. Nobody gave us a textbook when we were like 2 years old.
Exactly. And this is where his critique of the synthetic syllabus comes in.
Okay.
He says that by breaking down the language into these little pieces, grammar points, vocabulary lists.
Right, all those verb tenses.
Exactly. It just doesn't match up with how our brains actually learn.
It's like trying to put together those, what are the Swedish furniture things?
Oh, you mean IKEA?
IKEA, yeah, IKEA furniture. It's like trying to build that with just looking at the screws,
And not the instructions.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You might recognize the parts, but good luck getting that thing built.
Yeah, and that's what he says is happening with the synthetic syllabus.
Okay.
We're so focused on all the individual pieces that we're not seeing the big picture.
Okay, so if the synthetic syllabus is the problem, what's the solution?
Well, Jordan's a really big proponent of what's called task-based language teaching.
Okay.
TBLT, for short.
TBLT, got it.
And it's about shifting that focus from learning about the language to actually using it.
Okay.
So we give students real-world tasks.
Okay. What does that actually look like in the classroom?
So think about things like, planning a trip, ordering food, writing a letter of complaint, maybe having a debate.
Right. Things that we actually do in our everyday lives.
Exactly.
Not just conjugating verbs in a vacuum.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's communicative, it's goal-oriented.
And because it's a task, they have to use a lot of different language skills, to problem solve, to negotiate meaning.
Right, so it's more organic, I guess.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like TBLT really flips the script on how we teach.
Yeah.
But does it actually work?
Well, that's the best part.
Okay.
Jordan talks about a ton of research that shows that TBLT has better long-term results for learners.
That's great.
Because they're not just memorizing, they're developing that confidence and fluency to actually use the language out in the real world.
That's what we want.
Exactly.
But I imagine it takes a really skilled teacher to implement something like TBLT.
You're absolutely right. And that actually brings us to another important part of his book, and that's his critique of the entire ELT industry.
Ooh, okay. Tell me more.
He doesn't hold back. He says that a lot of times the way the industry is set up, it prioritizes money over what's best for teachers and learners.
Okay.
He's especially critical of the textbook industry.
Okay, because textbooks, they're expensive.
They're so expensive and they're outdated, like the minute they're printed.
Yes.
And he argues that this focus on textbooks, it just keeps us stuck in that old way of teaching.
Yeah.
With that synthetic syllabus that we were just talking about.
So they're part of the problem, not the solution.
In a way, yeah. And it's not just the textbooks. He also talks about standardized testing.
Oh, boy.
Like the IELTS and the TOEFL.
I mean, I've taken those tests. And
Yeah.
they're so stressful.
They're awful, right?
Yeah.
And Jordan's point is that these tests, they don't really measure how well someone can actually use English in the real world.
No, they don't.
Right. They just create all this anxiety.
Yeah.
And teachers end up feeling pressured to teach to the test instead of, actually teaching.
It's like we're narrowing the whole learning experience,
Yeah.
instead of expanding it.
Exactly. And it's a shame because there's so much more to language than just getting a certain score on a test.
Right, right. So we've got to ditch the textbooks. We've got to rethink standardized tests. But what about the teachers?
Oh, that's so important. He's all about giving teachers more power.
Yes.
He's like, teachers are the experts.
Yeah.
He criticizes a lot of these teacher training programs because he says they're too focused on just like following a script.
Okay, so he wants teachers to be more than just like robots in the classroom.
Exactly. He wants teachers to be critical thinkers, to be creative.
Okay, I like that.
To really understand how their students learn best.
So more like facilitators of learning than just deliverers of content, I guess.
Exactly. He really believes that teachers are the key to changing the whole system.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of problems, but it sounds like Jordan is hopeful that things can change.
Oh, absolutely. And he gives some really great examples of people who are already making a difference.
Okay, well, tell me more about that. So he's not just going to leave us hanging with all these problems and no solutions.
No, not at all. He talks about, he gives some really inspiring examples of people and groups that are already doing things differently.
Okay, like who? Give me some hope here.
Well, he talks about this group in Barcelona. It's called the SLB Cooperative.
Okay.
And it's entirely run by teachers.
Wow.
And they basically just said, okay, we're done with the traditional language school model.
Okay.
We're going to do our own thing.
I love that.
So they offer better conditions for teachers, obviously, but they've also got this really learner-centered approach.
Where it's all about, real communication, collaboration, doing projects.
So they're putting the ideas into practice. They're not just talking about it.
Exactly. And they're proving that it can be done, you know?
That's fantastic.
And it's not just about these big, systemic changes.
Yeah.
Jordan also talks about smaller things that teachers can do, every day in the classroom to make a difference. I mean, it could be as simple as, swapping out a textbook dialogue for, I don't know, a short film or maybe a podcast that uses, authentic language.
Okay, so bringing the real world into the classroom a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for learners, it could be about finding more opportunities to use English outside of class, in their everyday lives.
Right, like joining a club.
Yeah. Or volunteering or even just watching movies, right?
Exactly. All those things.
Without subtitles.
Without subtitles.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the key.
Okay.
It's all about creating those immersive experiences that Jordan's talking about.
So it sounds like, if we want to sum it all up, it's really about rethinking our whole approach to how English is taught and learned.
100%.
It's more than just memorizing a bunch of rules.
It's about, connecting with people, with cultures. It should be enjoyable. It shouldn't be this, terrible, stressful thing.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a chore.
No, exactly.
It should be fun.
It should be fun.
So, as we wrap things up here, we want to leave our listeners with something to think about. If you could redesign the way that English is taught and learned around the world, what would that look like? What would you change?
Yeah, that's a great question to think about.
And that is our deep dive into English language teaching by Geoff Jordan.
Fantastic book.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time.